Do your games get bogged down and you're looking for a way to speed things up? I know that combat can sometimes take longer than anything else in the game, but it doesn't have to. Let's cover a few things that we as GMs can do to speed up our turn and help us out getting through those long combat. So as the GM, we have a lot of things that we have to keep track of and do. And keeping our players engaged is one of them. I know we run the game and we narrate the world. We're in charge of the story, so our players should have to force themselves to stay focused. So I understand the sentiment, and it's their job to find a reason to adventure. It's our job to keep the game running to a point that everyone doesn't get bored and lose interest. And there's only so much we can do, but we have to try. And nothing can do this more than combat, especially when it's not your turn. Everyone loves their turn. Everyone is there in the moment and performing their amazing feat, but a lot of people aren't good when it's someone else's turn or your turn as a GM. Now, as GMs, we are kind of prepared for whatever is coming up. Monsters made, encounters planned, and spells should be on the lists. But sometimes we are met with decision fatigue when dealing with our players. I mean, if we're playing smart NPCs, then they would act differently depending on the scenario and whatever the actions are of our players, right? So here are 10 ways that we as GMs can shorten our turn and make controlling, in some situations, controlling multiple NPCs take less time and force our help our players stay engaged. One thing we can do is limit the number of different combatants that we have on the field. Our players have only one character usually. They have to keep track of, on rare occasions, maybe they have a familiar, eidolons, companions, whatever, mounts. Maybe they're a wizard, they can summon a monster, but normally have one character to keep track of. So it should be fairly easy for them to keep up with it and keep up with the flow of combat. We, not wanting to up the CR, possibly TPKing our party every combat, will probably add more combatants to the encounter. Grouping the types or limiting the different enemies in the encounter will drastically help you. Now, I have run full-on PCs against my players. Sometimes they have assassins or a group that are complex and every one of them are different or they're different sects in the order. Maybe a mimic of the players having to control them all and adjust to the different rules of each class. But you don't want to do this each time, as you will bog down every single combat. The flavor of that special opponent means less, and it takes longer. And your players, like I said, will not notice it near as much. In this encounter, I have limited to 2 different types of enemies, picking the stronger, more complex opponent with more feats and rules required to run to be in the less number than the simple goblin. In higher levels, it can make a drastic difference by doing something like this. Number 2, initiative can be another thing that can be made simple. In my Descent into Avernus game, at one point I'm controlling a horde of monsters, Lulu, as well as another NPC combatant they have with them. And remembering when each goes and having to take all the turns can get a little annoying. On a VTT, this is not too bad, for as we go through our combat tracker, it will cycle the tokens, whose turn it is, and it's easy to keep track and not get messed up with anything. You know, whether this monster or that one took damage last turn, which one has the buff on him, which one has been cursed. But if you're not using technological assistance, I might recommend something a little different. One way is to roll all monsters on a single initiative. While this is good sometimes, if you have monsters with several different stats, your players are going to feel cheated when oozes and ogres go in the same part of the initiative as the goblins due to their high dex score. Now, you could just use the lowest of the monsters, but who wants to let their players go first every time? You got to shake it up. Another way is to stage them into groups. Either they move in a unified group, like a team or a party, and they move that way around the battlefield, or they move unified by their type. All the goblins, all the ogres, whatever. This allows us to roll an initiative roll for either the group or the odd monsters. This way, we're keeping them either by their type or their group. And it's much fairer, and it still is going to split things up. This way, all of our goblins, as we see here, go first. Then our brutes will cut in later on in the turn, wherever they are. This is also part of the tip. I usually don't have my players know when the NPCs are acting in the initiative until it's the NPC's turn. It keeps them guessing. I also like whenever I either roll them separately or have them separate so that they go in different parts of the initiative. It gives my players more variables, more things they have to think about than, okay, all the monsters are gone, it's our turn now. And so it keeps them more engaged, having to wonder what's going to happen. Another thing is to remember that you don't have to play perfectly. Again, this can be harder as you progress in CR between items and supposedly smarter opponents, but you're going to make mistakes. As you're going through your turn, it's fine. Maybe you had them cast a spell and it was not optimal as it should have been. Maybe it didn't work at all. You totally forgot that your characters cast some dispensive spell just the turn before. That's fine. This tracks the same as with your players. They do this too, I'm sure. Roll with decision, proceed on with the round. Sometimes it's better to play a monster as best you can. And if you forget something, you can always double check, get around to it next turn, consider it. Maybe he just messed up. It happens. Just like we sometimes will have to skip a player's turn, maybe if they take too long or they don't finish with all their decisions or they missed something. They get to it next turn too. Number 4, tactics. Not only should we have looked over what we're going to be using against the party, we should also be thinking about the tactics to an extent when we're setting these things up. You have ranged, maybe put them in the back, protect them from behind cover. Remember to consider why they're doing what they're doing, how the NPCs could affect their morale as they're going. Having notes for this set up beforehand, have them set up to act a certain way already, will make it easier, and you're not going to have near as much decision fatigue when the moment of truth arrives and you're having to narrate and play everybody. Number 5, as a GM, it can be tricky to remember so much, but we should always know kind of what our players are capable of. We don't have to look at their spells for every day, but knowing what they have access to, their stats, can help you with your decisions and how you're going to use your NPCs. AC is very critical as it's the stat that we're attacking the most, so we're going to deal with it the most. But having a general idea of where most of your party's saves are is good too. This helps us whenever we're creating the encounters and not just playing with the CR calculator and hoping everything's right whenever it comes down to it, and then having to panic because we mess something up and change it on the fly. Number 6, this kind of goes along with the initiative, but you can pre-roll some of your rolls for the monsters. I mean, unless you're playing at a table and everybody sees all your rolls all the time, do you know what they're going to roll for a perception before the party rolls their stealth? I do this all the time. I also do this because it lets me have rolls on the side so my parties don't instantly go, I stop, I check everything, get silent, we cast these buffs, we do these spells. It's going to save me time. It is also going to leave a bit of mystery for your players. And maybe even you already have their initiative set up and they're already put into an order. And all you got to do is start with your attacks and let the party catch up with initiative. Number 7, limiting table talk is a good thing with your players, and it's a good thing for us too. Now, a lot of times we forget to have our NPCs speak a whole bunch, but I try to enforce similar rules when it comes to myself as my players. I may narrate, monologue, or yell for help on my turn, complete all the tasks or things for those monsters during their turn, as we're going through the rest of their actions, means I have a whole round to think about it all before it comes back to that monster. Limiting some talk with your players should almost be mandatory, in all honesty, because a lot of times they are going to talk and try and strategize in the middle of their 6-second combat. While you can be fairly lenient with this, and I can be at some times, especially with something that's common, I try to limit them so that they don't give the Gettysburg Address every 6-second turn, advising everyone else what they need to do and what spells we're going to do. So, like with my NPCs, since I do that with them, I keep them to a stricter time during their turn of being to yell or something. Number 8, rolling dice. Now, a lot of us will roll our attacks with the damage, and that greatly decreases the time it takes for our turns. Another thing is a case for VTTs. Having it done for you in the time it takes for your dice to start to hit the table is pretty powerful. Adding in all the modifiers, since I play a lot of things like Pathfinder, adding in all the modifiers is where it comes in handy, because you don't have to stop and start doing all the math for all 12 of your goblins that all have either different attacks or different effects and strength and cleave and deadeye or whatever abilities they have. This makes your wizard his damage spells at 10d6 for fireballs much easier. And I don't mind doing it so much more for me as a DM, because it helps my turn speed up. And then a lot of times I will have that general or lieutenant or that big bad of this encounter or what they've been dealing with, and he will roll his dice out in front of everyone like everyone else does. But there are plenty of times where I have rolled things with my VTT to make things faster, and that way my players don't have to wait for my 400 rolls that I'm going to have to make. This is also one reason why some of your books, like with 5e, you'll see there's averages put down there, and you can just use the average. And I've met DMs that just use the average for those kind of rolls. But it's to help speed us up so that we can get back to our players and keep the game moving and keep them engaged. Number 9, let your NPCs die. That's right. They're probably going to die anyway. That's why we made them. Let them die. One of the few things that I still use for monsters from 4th edition is the idea of minions. They have the same or a similar attack, abilities, something to make them a threat, a target, so they can't just be ignored, but they will have a single hit dice. This allows my party to mop up large swaths of enemies, making them feel powerful, and I can still pose a threat with them being able to deal damage. Also, if I have a monster that is close to death, unless it is serving a purpose, I just let it die. Let it take that few extra HP, unless it's going to do something. Maybe it would last till the next person's combat, or it would get one more attack. But if it has 2 HP left, and especially if that player hasn't gotten up on the kill count lately, it's time to just let that monster die. Number 10, let your PCs help. Now, I know we have control issues, but sometimes it's good to let our guys help. Now, not control the enemies. That's going to end almost assuredly badly. Or animosity for killing a fellow player, or them dropping all the baddies' weapons and giving up, or doing actions that they know that they shouldn't do just so that they win. But if you have an NPC, like I stated earlier with Lulu, give it to a player. Make them deal with it, especially if they either have interactions with that NPC or they're similar. In my Avernus game, I gave Lulu to the Paladin. Make them deal with it. It helps them so they can keep track and stay engaged in combat more. help them control with initiative. Maybe they take over. Have them count down on turns, even if they don't know why. Or maybe it's turns until that trap crushes everyone or the gas suffocates your wizard friend. This lightens our burden and lets us try and keep our big GM turn as short as possible. Frees up our mind, and it allows them to feel more engaged, like they have more to do with what's happening around them. These kind of things can really help your players feel involved in the story and not just providing a single action for a round of combat, or have them help when it comes to NPCs in non-combat areas. My players have provided more than enough material and suggestions when it comes to just their average story or the way that the narrative is going than they probably will ever realize. And that's 10 little tricks I use while being a GM for my table. If you have any cool tips that help with shortening combat and shortening the burden on us GMs, leave them in the comments below. And remember to try out another one of my videos for advice at your table. And I'll see you next time. If you like this video, check out my others. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. If you have any tips or requests, drop them in the comments below. And until next time, may your crits be epic, your adventures legendary, and your gaming table filled with laughter.